Welcome back to the Contractor Elite Podcast. I'm your host, Aidan Hennebree, and today we are sitting down with Sean Hansen. Sean works here at Boshart Industries. He is the U.S. District Manager for the Northeastern U.S. and the Midwest. And today's episode is all about how to become the go-to guy or gal for your customers. Now you want to stick around. We cover some interesting stuff, especially in the second half. This conversation takes a bit of a turn that you might not be expecting if you just read the description of the episode. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Sean, so good to have you here, buddy. It's been a long time coming. We've been meaning to have you in some videos for quite a while, so I'm pumped you're here. Thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, thanks for letting me be part of the show. It's exciting.
Yeah, man, cool. Well, I know that we've got a really good one in store today. I know that this is a topic that you know a lot about, but maybe for anyone that's unfamiliar with who you are, what you do here at Boshart, and maybe even a little bit before that, before you maybe came on staff here at Boshart, can you give us just a bit of, who is Sean Hansen? What do you do? What's your background, especially dealing with contractors, wholesale industry, anything there?
Sure. Well, currently I'm the district manager for the Northeast and Midwest U.S., so I oversee the sales and the accounts in those territories. But started as an irrigation contractor when I was 16 years old, working for an irrigation contractor. Right. So I have 12 years experience as a contractor. Also then went to work for distribution. So, and worked about every job in the distribution, from the counter to delivery guy and sales, manage stores. So about every role. Interacted with, really be focused on the customer aspect of that business. And then later in life went to work for several manufacturers in the irrigation industry, and part-time was a general contractor building and flipping houses, and so I have a little bit of experience in that management of construction. So I've been on both sides of it.
I love that, man. That's awesome. I didn't know that you'd worked in irrigation as a 16-year-old. How do you get into a job like that?
Well, in the summer in Nebraska, there's not a lot of jobs. You can, when you're 16, you can wash dishes at the restaurants, or you can dig holes. And that one, working outside, it was a lot more fun, right? So
that's fair.
Yeah, it was great.
I love that, man.
As it gets in your blood.
Yeah, it does, right? Well, here you are, how many years later, and you didn't stray too far, right? One of the things that I really like about you, Sean, and I know it definitely is a huge inspiration to Boshart's broader sales team as a whole, is I would describe you as a workhorse. You are great at what you do. You are one of the most driven guys that I know, at least just within my immediate sphere. Has that always come naturally to you? Were at 16 years old when you enter irrigation? Was that what it was, or what? How did you kind of get to become the way you are?
That's a great question. I guess this is just the way you're raised, maybe. Yeah. And to be honest with you, I guess I never really looked at myself like that. I think now I look back at it and realize it came from my family, who worked hard, and I don't know that I always took after them in that manner. As a young kid, I kind of screwed off a lot, but I think it was still ingrained in me, and I guess that's where it comes from.
I love that. But
at the end of the day, I'm just me. I really don't feel like I try to do that, I guess.
I love that, man. Well, I would have to imagine that strong work ethic has served you well in the spheres that you work in contracting and so on and so forth. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Within that, especially on the wholesale side and distribution, and in your role right now at Boshart, one of the things that I think really sets you apart as a salesperson, as a district manager that oversees a team of salespeople, is your ability to really speak to the needs and the pain points of your customers. And so I'm wondering, can you tell me about how do you become skillful at that? So especially, maybe if you're new to the industry or you're unfamiliar with, maybe it's a certain customer or something, how do you start to identify points of leverage for your customers? When you're dealing with customers, one of the ways that you can add value, of course, is always offering a cheaper price. But going far beyond that, you and I have had many conversations about this over the years. How do you start to go beyond that? How do you become the go-to guy? What does it mean for someone stepping into this? How do they start to become the go-to guy for their customers?
Well, I think the first thing you have to do is you have to learn what the pain points are for your customer, right? And you have to understand what they do and why they do it, what they struggle with. And so when you come from their background or have a little bit of experience in their background, that gives you the ability to understand some of the things that they struggle with, and that leads to success. And so once you have that, it's easy to connect. Connect on a little different level where you can talk frankly and directly. And I think that's the most important thing, is to listen more than you talk, and to learn about your customer, and then help him make his business better. I mean, that's really what it is, and it's not as difficult as it sounds, but I think that as salesmen often we're too eager to talk rather than to listen.
Can you tell me, like, has there been a time where you've been on the poor side of that decision, where you've spoken too much and not listened enough? Can you tell me about a specific time where, maybe you had that realization of, maybe I should talk a little less and listen a little more?
Yeah, very early in my sales career, that was exactly what I was doing. I was so eager to show these contractors that I was calling on that I knew what, understood their business and kind of came from their background, that I wasn't listening, right? And I was only doing the talking, and really I look back at a specific conversation I was having with a customer. He was trying to share some insight with me, and he was a very experienced contractor, and I was young, but thought I knew more than I did. And I kind of I wasn't listening. I was telling him as I was authoritative, or as if I knew more than him, and he called me out on it, right? And he said that he's the first one that told me, like, maybe you ought to listen a little more instead of doing all the talking, and we might do a little bit more business together. The interesting thing about that is, in the long run, that guy became one of my best customers. Really? And even after I left that industry and wasn't with him, he still called me and asked my opinion on things. So it was amazing how we came full circle, right?
I find that so fascinating that it started in such a different way than the relationship carried on, right? So you're saying in the beginning, you're super green, you have no idea what you're doing, and you're trying to speak with authority to this guy, and he calls you on it because he knows more than you, right? So I imagine that's very humbling, but it's cool that then over time, the more that contractor and you work together, that actually shifted to such a degree that even after you left, he called you. How did you get from A to B? Like how so you're saying listen more, like is it true that all contractors, all customers have the same problem?
Well, no, they don't have all the same problem, that's for sure.
That's good, that was a leading question.
Yeah, so. They definitely don't have the same problem, but what I would say is you're never going to find out what the problem is if you're not doing the listening, right? I always try to tell the people that I work with now on my team, the goal here is to ask 5-word questions and get a 40-word answer, right? And that's how you can be most impactful for your customer, because he don't need to learn about you need to learn about him, right? And so it's everybody's problems are different, all the battles are different, and I think that when you realize that, you're a better resource for your customer.
So again, kind of moving from A to B, right? So becoming kind of this guy that's, you're working the counter, you're making sales, whatever, and you kind of don't know what you're doing, and then by the end of that relationship, you do. So one of the ways that obviously you had a bit of an advantage there was having worked as a teenager doing some of that contracting yourself. What about like sales books, courses, things like that? Like maybe in your time here at Boshart, what have been valuable practices for you as a business person, as a salesperson, like what have been things along the way that have really helped you to grow and develop and not just stagnate and kind of plateau and never grow any further?
Well, I think to start with, there are a ton of resources for our industry that can be used, right? I love Boshart U and subscribing to that blog just as an example. But there, every manufacturer, a lot of manufacturers, I should say, have tools like that. And I enjoy all of them, the supply house times. I came into this job having no experience in the plumbing and well water industry. And so I had to learn it, right? And there's some relatable things from irrigation, there really is. There are a lot of similarities, and the distribution model's the same, there's no doubt. But at the end of the day, I didn't know anything about the product, what it was used for. I think I worked here for 2 years before I knew what a drop pipe coupling was, right? And so, I knew what a drop pipe coupling was, but how it was really used. And so I think watching just soaking up all the information you can, reading articles, trying to stay up on what this industry is doing is great, and it's important. And so I think there are tools like that help you in the industry. But I also think that we kind of have to challenge ourselves. We have to become better all the time. We have to grow as people. And that's something I believe in, and as you know, Boshart believes in, and we continue to utilize tools every day. And I love to read several books a year, and I think the goal is to always be a better person and a better resource for your customers.
And again, like, this speaks to why I think that you have had the career you've had and been so successful and been the go-to guy for your customers, is that you don't just take what you know and go, okay, I've arrived. I've done it. I've hit the peak. This is as good as it gets, right? And I think even for you, I would imagine a unique position that you have is the fact that you manage a sales team, and you manage not just in-house guys, but you also manage reps. And so how valuable has that been for you and your experience, and maybe that of your team, to have a network of people in the same place as them, trying to accomplish some of the same goals? Like, has that been a help? Do you guys find that useful?
Absolutely. When you have a great team of people who bring different strengths and weaknesses, and you bring them all together, you can do just some amazing things, and you can see amazing growth. People, when they work with other great, will challenge themselves to become better at the things that they're not good at. And wow, the team that I work with, an amazing amount of talent. And it makes me want to, it really makes me want to become more like them in the ways that I am not, right? I
think that's interesting. Like, part of what I imagine working with people in the same place as you, in your industry, business owners, what have you, is that it's going to, whether consciously or subconsciously, identify your weaknesses, right? And what I feel like I hear a lot of what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that, whether it was dealing with that guy at the counter, fresh into distribution, or with your sales team today, looking at what are the things that I don't excel at, and how do I become more like them and their strengths. I imagine that is a useful thing for sure, right? But it involves certainly a level of vulnerability and a level of being able to admit to yourself, hey, maybe I am not as good at this as I could be yet, right? Can you speak to that? Has there been a time in, maybe something past couple of years, or just in your history in general, where you've been able to look at yourself and identify, okay, here's a weakness of mine, and how did you go about maybe tackling that and improving on that weakness?
Yeah, you have to be vulnerable. You use the right word there, right? And just really, ask, hey, I admire this about you. And that's what I did just recently with a coworker. I admire this trait, that you have, and I don't have that trait, and I'd really like to develop that. And when you have a resource like that and you are vulnerable enough to ask, what can they do but want to help you, right? And so since that time, I mean, he has spent a tremendous amount of time with me, kind of mentoring me on, being adding that to the repertoire, let's just say, right? And developing those skills myself. And so, I think you have to ask the question and not when you do know. But you can't let it beat you up either, right? It's very easy to let a weakness that you've identified in yourself affect you in a very negatively, right? You got to use it to drive you instead of use it to beat you down.
I respect that. Well, I love this conversation. I love that we've turned to vulnerability, because I'm even, drawing the connection between being able to ask questions, especially of your customers, and to try to understand them better. It involves some level of vulnerability, right? Because in essence, what you're saying is like, you know something that I don't, and I would like to know that. And it's been my belief for many years now that in a lot of ways, asking someone to teach you something, or asking them just a question and asking them to, again, share some of their knowledge, their experience with you, it's a compliment, right? Because it's saying, hey, there is something that you have that's valuable, and I'm wondering, are you willing to impart at least some of that to me, right? And so maybe part of, to kind of bring this back, how do you become the go-to guy for your customers? I think there's probably a good amount of that that's rooted in curiosity, right? But again, it certainly involves the willingness to be vulnerable and ask questions. I'm sure there have been times in your career you've asked questions of people and it was not received well. You did not get great feedback. What do you do in a situation like that where you are trying to put yourself out there, you're trying to learn, maybe we'll use the example, you're dealing with a customer, you're trying to understand their situation, you're feeling resistance. What does someone do in that situation?
I feel like you can't beat your head against the wall, right? Some people don't want to engage, and when you identify those times, you can really diffuse the situation, spin it. It doesn't mean you have to leave the situation, but maybe if you want to ask questions they're not comfortable answering, make it more of a conversation and try to get their guard down a little bit, right? But at the end of the day, sometimes you're just not going to connect with people. It's just not going to happen, right? And I think that's okay. We're not all wired the same. We're not all built the same. And I think all of us in some ways kind of have a predetermined notion before we go into a conversation with someone we really don't know. So if I'm a contractor, what I mean by this is if I'm a contractor and someone calls me and asks for a meeting, I have a predetermined notion of what that is probably going to look like and what I'm going to say, right? That can be changed by that interaction, and sometimes you can impress them to the point where their guard comes down. But that's really what it's all about. A lot of times in that situation, if you're vulnerable with a person and you put yourself out there, they're going to let that guard come down a little bit, where you can have more frank and direct conversations. That's what I would tell you.
I think that's interesting because, ideally when you are being vulnerable, that will be reciprocated, right? Usually not immediately. Usually it still takes time. Sometimes it's immediate, I'm sure. Other times it takes time to get there, right?
Yep.
Has there been a time where you have had to work at helping someone get their guard down? And I don't mean that in a manipulative way that did you just keep hammering on someone until they caved in? But have you identified, I'm sure, yeah, maybe you've done that as well, but have you identified, is there, can you think of a time when you had a relationship with someone and you felt like, hey, there is potential here, there's something good, and not just, I can, separate him from his money really quickly sooner and later, but I actually believe I have a genuine opportunity to help this guy, but he just doesn't see it yet. Can you think of a time where that had happened, and kind of how did you start to move the needle in your direction?
Yeah, I'm just thinking back right now to a specific situation, and I think in a little bit in some ways fits what you're asking about. So I had developed a relationship with this contractor early in my career where weekly he would see me, right? Every week, right? And I would go in and I would see him and I would talk about this product or this product, and every week he would kind of pause, and at the end of the meeting he would say, okay, I'll let you know.
What every salesperson loves to hear.
Right. So I'd come back the next week, and I'm going to get this sale, and I would talk about a product, and I would maybe share a product special, or hey, we got this going on, whatever. And at the end of the meeting, I would just kind of put the ball back in his court, and he would say, I'll let you know. But he kept taking these meetings, right? And I finally one day, I bet we had 6-7 meetings, always on a Monday. He always met me on a Monday. And I asked him, like, I have been here 7 weeks in a row. I talked to you about all these things. I know my price is good. I know we have the product. Why will you not order? Why will you not place an order? You tell me you're going to let me know, and an order never comes in. And he said, you've never asked me for an order. He wanted me to ask him for the order. That's all it was. And I could not identify that in that conversation. And the reason I bring it up is he was challenging me to know him well enough to know that I had to ask for the order. It was that simple. And to this day, I still use that because so many people just need that little push. They just need you to say, hey, can I get this order from you today? And there are other ways to do it, including, that led me to develop into putting mock orders together and taking them into meetings with me and being more successful. But the whole point being, even being vulnerable, you still got to pay attention to their needs and their desires a little bit.
So here's a question I have about that, because I can imagine that for some people listening, they might be thinking that there's a contradiction here, okay? And I wonder if you can speak to it, because I imagine, I don't think it is, but I imagine some people might. So if we're talking about being the go-to guy, and in essence, at least in my mind, what that means is that a customer is coming to you as opposed to you going to them, right? So again, to be the go-to guy means that you are the resource, you are the pillar, you are the person that knows what they're talking about. When you're giving that example of that customer who the only real thing that was missing at the end was him saying, I want you to ask me for my business, how that feels to me is that that's you going to him. Some people might even mistake that for desperation, which I don't, but I'm curious to anyone who might be thinking that, how do you reconcile those things? How are those compatible?
I should have got back to I got off track in my story. At the end of the day, after that was over and I did get that business, 20 years later, that guy, I'm not even in the irrigation industry anymore, but I talk to him monthly and he asked me questions about my business. That relationship also really grew and developed. I spent more time talking to you about the mistakes I made in that relationship than I did about how that developed into being the go-to guy. But I just think over time, what came of that was the little things added up and started to matter. I identified in what he needed and what was important to him as a person, and going in then I made sure that I was doing those little things, because that's really what makes you the person they want to talk to, go to, and ask questions to. The little things that you do, going above and beyond, and learning their business and trying to help them solve their problems, even when you don't benefit from that, right? And that is the key there, and that's the relationship that him and I developed over time. And it's really, to this day, one that I enjoy.
I think that's interesting because we in some of the different contractor lead episodes, we've talked about partnership and what it means to not just be to have a transactional relationship with a customer, but to try to actually take it to the next level and build that partnership. And so you mentioned a couple things about, it seemed like for a time you did have to go to him, but once you'd earned that trust, then for 20 years and long after you'd left, he still came to you looking for advice and feedback and direction, right? I just think that is such an interesting thing, and it speaks to, again, the partnership aspect of all of this, that there might be times that you are solving problems for your customer that don't necessarily benefit you, right?
Absolutely.
So for anyone listening to this, that maybe they're just busy as anything and they don't have time to do that for their customers or people they're building relationships with, how would you push back on that in terms of saying, like, hey, this is investing in your future to solve problems for your customers that may not immediately benefit you? Like, how does, in the long term, that actually benefit you as a business owner?
Well, how much time does it take to get an answer for someone? You don't have to have that answer, and I think that's the mistake we make. I feel like as salespeople, we get crossed up when we don't just want to say, I don't know. It's okay to say, I don't know. But if a guy's sharing a struggle looking for some assistance, say, I don't know, and then go use your other resources to see if you can find the answer. Give him a call back. How much time does that take, right? And I think that's the little things that get missed all too often. We don't ever want to say, I don't know. But I don't know, I feel like that's an opportunity, right? I don't know is telling him, I'm not going to act like I can solve your problem, but if you get back with him, what's that say to him? That say to him that he's important to you. It says that he's worth your investment of time, and it says your struggle mattered so much that I went and investigated that myself. And I think that's a great opportunity to, that's how you build those things. That's the little things that matter, where you can build the trust that you need to be the go-to guy for your customer.
I think, again, that goes back to vulnerability, right? Yeah. Saying I don't know is a very vulnerable thing because, especially if you're new to the industry, you want to hide the fact that you don't know stuff as often as you can. You want to look more professional and put together. And so instead of using your inexperience almost as a tool and an asset and a rapport builder, we try to stuff it down and hide it, right? And of course there's value to that, but I think all of that, all of this ties in that there's, I think, an intrinsic element of being the go-to guy means being vulnerable when you don't know something, being willing to say it out loud, right? Yeah. Have you found yourself in a position where you've lied about not knowing something, or you've tried to, maybe lie is too strong a word, but tried to kind of fake your way through something and it caught you off guard? Can you speak to that and maybe the lesson you took home from that?
I can't think of any specific situation, but I will say I have seen others fake their way through it. I faked my way through it, not necessarily lying, faked my way through conversations a little bit, but I was listening. But I've worked with a lot of people who could not say I don't know. And it was such a hindrance to their reputation that you can't ever overcome it. And it's man, I would just say nobody respects BS, really, at the end of the day, but so many people are vulnerable to, they're not willing to be vulnerable, they're susceptible to that, I gotta know the answer or else he's not gonna respect me. I actually think he'd respect you more. It's no different for contractors, right? When contractors are going in and seeing a homeowner, they're calling you in because you're the professional. Right? They really are. But it's okay if they ask you about something to say, I'm not exactly sure about that particular product or that particular thing you're talking about, but here's what I do know, and I'm going to look into that, right? And so I think that happens a lot more than people think. And I think one of the biggest things that even contractors make sometimes, and I did myself, was make the mistake of going into a situation where you're talking to a homeowner or someone who called you to do work for them, and you make every situation the same. You don't look at it individually and say, I'm gonna do it this way, or I'm gonna use this in this scenario because this is what's best for your situation. No, this is how I do it because I'm comfortable doing it this way, even though it might not be exactly what John Q. homeowner wants. I hope that answers your question.
It does, yeah. Well, it reminds me of, so there's a book, it's called Think Again. If I'm not mistaken, I think the author's name is Adam Grant. And the entire concept, have you read that book?
No.
I know a couple of our salespeople have talked about it. So the entire concept of the book, anyways, if I can butcher it, is that we get into these routines, these patterns of thinking, and we do not step back and reanalyze the situation for what it is, right? And there's a number of amazing stories throughout the book that really highlight the danger that this can be to us. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, there was something even about doctors or surgeons or something, that if they are too quick to diagnose, that they can easily misdiagnose and then make things that much worse for their patients, right? And so all of that, to me, it's reminding me of the importance of constantly analyzing, not just looking for a couple symptoms, thinking, okay, this is what's wrong, and then just making every decision based on that assumption, right? Yeah. It's taking the time to slow down, to ask the appropriate questions, to really make sure you have a really great understanding of the situation, right? And I think that is maybe another layer of what it means to be a go-to guy, is not that you are the know-it-all, but maybe it's someone who's always learning, right? Always developing, always pushing themselves. And I think, again, that goes back to what you're saying about, working in a sales team, working with other people, going through the same things as you and trying to take as much knowledge from them as you can, right? It's this constantly evolving thing. And so, would you say that that's true?
Absolutely. And I want to expand a little bit. I think you have to look at situations differently, and some of the things I kind of was working on that I knew we would end up discussing in this kind of, I think, is a great time to bring this in. And this is true for contractors. It's true if you're in distribution selling to contractors. It's true if you're, a manufacturer selling to distributors. It doesn't really matter. I did a study many years ago, was done for a specific reason, but I have never forgot it. Contractor, whether in any of these roles when you're doing sales, everybody tends to, when you're young in this business and inexperienced, think it's all about price. But at the end of the day, it really isn't. And I got some evidence from a study on this. So when you get into this, too many times it's brought up, it's all about the price, or that's too expensive, or I can't offer that because it's too expensive. I'll give you a perfect example. I have a contractor buddy of mine, really good friend, and he's a plumber, and I've asked him probably 4 times, I've said, hey man, I'm thinking about getting one of them tankless water heaters. What do you think? And his response every time has been, oh, they're too expensive. I never talked about, I never said to him, I only want to spend X amount of dollars. But his mindset is, they're too expensive to put in. He didn't say they didn't work. He didn't say there wasn't any value in those. He just said they're too expensive. But that's, you can tell that's the mindset. We've had this conversation 4 times. That's how it always ends, right? And so my point being, we can trick ourselves into that mindset, but when you get into the numbers, only 20% of Americans buy based on price. Only 20. The fact of the matter is 70% of all American consumers buy the best value, not the best price, what they have deemed the best value, right? And then you have another 10% that are premium buyers. Those are the people that buy Cadillacs and they drive Cadillacs and Lexus, right? 10% are premium buyers, but only 20%. So if only 20% of the consumers are price focused, why are we not looking for how to get the value across? Why is my buddy, who has told me 4 times that tankless water heat, I still don't know what they cost because he has never told me. He just said they're too expensive. Yep. What's too expensive, right? And so it's a struggle, right? I think that we sell it short. Now I think the good ones figure that out, right? And they figure out that there is value above the dollar. But it's a good way to trick yourself into thinking. When you go in to talk to a homeowner, they think you're a professional. They called you in. If they ask about something for you to say, oh, that's awful expensive, I would do it this way. That's kind of missing the focus of them calling you in as the professional, isn't it?
I love that, man. That's so good. And I think it's interesting because, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that, okay, everyone wants the cheapest price I can give them, right? But I think what you're speaking about value, that is like the key to this whole thing, right? Is even just, not even dealing with product or services or whatever, but as it comes to the relationship, right? If you are providing value, if you're sharing insights, sharing knowledge, sharing experience, hey, this is how I would do it. I think that is something of insane value that you're providing that goes far beyond just a physical product, right? Again, you don't even know what the tankless water heater costs because you guys didn't even really get there, and maybe there's some difference of what he thinks you're looking for. You might be looking for quality, you don't care about price, but he goes, the price is prohibitive, right? And so
he's probably one of them 20%, right? He buys the cheapest whatever he can, right? That's my guess.
That's interesting. I love that. So I guess based on that, like, what are mistakes that people make as they try to become the trusted advisor, the go-to guy? Like, what? So I would assume one of the implications from that is don't just offer them the most expensive product, or don't just offer them the cheapest product. Offer them what is the best value for their goals and what they're trying to do, right? Are there other mistakes that people make as a trusted advisor, or any other things maybe on the other side of it, like huge benefits, things that you've done that have helped put you into that position with more and more people?
I think from a distribution perspective, one of the things that I developed over time too was understanding that we had a lot of contractors that did business with us that were really good at what they did, but they weren't very good business people. And that was where we could really help them, was to make sure that the little things that would allow them to make more money, we could help them develop, right? And so by connecting with them on another level, learning their business and identifying those kind of people and having frank conversations with them, you help them make more money. What better thing to do to become ingrained in their mind than you help them add $200 to their bid, right? And so I think that's really what it is.
So, I mean, I think that's interesting, right? Because in a roundabout way, what I feel like I hear you saying, tell me if I'm wrong, is that there kind of are no shortcuts in a lot of ways to becoming the go-to guy. Like, certainly there are proactive things that you can and should do in order to help get you there. It will not just naturally happen unless you're willing to wait a couple decades, but you have to talk to people, you have to get to know them, you have to be experienced. And again, when you come to situations where you're at the edge of your knowledge and you go, I don't exactly know, this is what I do know and what I would do given the situation, but I'll get back to you, right? And I think, again, this goes back to just constantly learning and expanding that knowledge. Like I was thinking, okay, does a go-to guy know a little bit about everything, or does he just know a lot about one really specific thing? I think it's that more and more he seeks anyways to know a lot about a lot of things. Is that true? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think one thing you said, I couldn't agree with more. If you really want to be somebody's go-to guy, it ain't gonna happen overnight. It don't happen quick. That it takes a long time to build trust. Trust is, and that's the key there, is they have to trust you, and they have to trust that you're not just there to sell them something, right? That you're there to help them. So, but absolutely, I would say I've got a little bit of knowledge about a lot of things because I've sought it out trying to help customers. and then so I have a little bit of knowledge, and then that makes me dangerous in a lot of things, right? So
That's fair. Well, and again, man, like what I think, to me, this comes through in your work ethic. Like, you are driven to know more. You are curious about things. You ask questions, leading us right back, full circle here, to all of that vulnerability and that willingness to just explore and be curious and seek to know more, right? Which I think is quite an interesting thing. Now, one of the interesting things also, I think, with a go-to guy is they are not yes men. They don't just agree with everything that the person they're advising, their customer, whatever, that they say or ask or assume, right? But also, to disagree with someone requires a certain level of trust and respect if you want them to hear you out, right? So my question to you really is, how do you go about challenging customers in a way that's respectful and in a way that doesn't lose them, but maybe even pulls them in? Like, how do you do that effectively?
It's a very difficult balance, and it's the one that probably takes the longest to develop, is that ability to challenge a customer when he disagrees with what you're saying or disagrees with your opinion. And I think the most important thing is you can't be too aggressive with it. Challenging doesn't mean beating them over the head with a rod, right? Challenging, hey man, I understand what you're saying, but have you ever thought about it like this? Or did you realize this? Challenge sounds like battling a little bit. That's just kind of what we convince ourselves of, and it's something that is hard to train the team on. Even is respectful challenge. But we'll tell you that when you can challenge somebody and even make them reconsider, even if they still don't necessarily agree with you, but if you challenge them in an effective way, and the light bulb comes on to make them at least reconsider, it becomes easier every time. Yep. And this just recently happened with me, and I was traveling with one of my territory managers, and we talked about a specific product, stainless steel PEX, and this distributor said, I don't really see much need for that in the market, right? And so I don't think we need to talk about that. And I said, hey, I respect that fact, but do you realize this? Do you realize that this is actually our number one market for stainless steel PEX, and here is why, right? And when I said that, he said, wait, can you talk about that some more, right? And it went from initial, I'm not interested in that, to let's talk about it. So that's a challenge. It's in an effective way. And so I think sometimes we look at it as an argument, and it's not. Yep.
Well, and so what I hear you saying is a go-to guy does not always take no for an answer in that regard, right? That, and especially after you've earned the trust and rapport, you can challenge and be heard a little bit earlier or more clearly in the conversation. When it comes to building up to become the go-to guy, do you advise challenging someone? And again, challenge is a heavy word, and we don't mean it quite as combative as it sounds, but is that an opportunity to earn trust and rapport with a customer? Should you let that go because you don't want to rock the boat and you want to be agreeable? Like, how do you find that balance of when, especially with someone that you don't know very well, you're in those, you're dating, right? You're not quite engaged or married yet. How do you know when to challenge or when to let something go? How do you do that responsibly, with wisdom, whatever?
It just takes time, and it takes you challenging yourself to put yourself out there, to take a risk a little bit. But also at the same time, I think it's recognizing that nobody wants to just deal with a salesman who's just a puppet order taker, really, at the end of the day, right? They want somebody they can rely on for help and knowledge and that they respect. And I think how better do they respect you than if you politely disagree and challenge them to think a little differently. I think you have to try it a couple times and you have to experience success, right? Because I will say it's very easy to have those conversations go poorly. So we got to handle them. And look, I'm kind of a bull in a china shop myself. I struggle sometimes. I'm not the most well-spoken, eloquent fella, right? And so very easy for my passion to come off as aggression with some people. But even I have learned kind of how to navigate through that and challenge in a respectful way. So if I can do it, anybody can do it. It just takes a little effort.
Well, and I think it's interesting, like, you know, for me, quite literally, yesterday I had called up a friend and asked him about his perspective on a situation, or kind of something I was going to do. And he immediately was like, whoa, pump the brakes. Like, I think you're totally wrong. And I heard him out, and I let him finish the phone call, and then we went away. And I was like kind of pissed because I'm like, I know he's right. I just really don't want him to be right. And it was fantastic because we've, built enough of a friendship that he's able to challenge me in a way that, in that exact moment, I'm not willing to say, hey, you know what, man, you're right and I'm totally wrong and I'm so glad I called you. I'm actually kind of pissed off that he's challenged me. I'm like, no, I'd rather you just agree with me, right? And so I think it's important for us not to forget that when we are dealing with our customers, that kind of light bulb moment can take time. Even if you've done all the work and it's just like, okay, now you just got to kind of let it marinate. That's okay. It's okay if you leave the conversation and they have not agreed with you then and there on the spot, right? And certainly, working in sales, that's a difficult thing to feel like, you're, catch and release a bit, that you're throwing the fish back in the lake. But in reality, we got to remember that we are human beings and we're prideful and we don't like to be embarrassed or wrong. And so sometimes people just need a minute to be able to say, you know what, you are right. Or at the end of the day, I reconsidered, or I crunched the numbers and I'm going to, take your advice or what have you. And you may never hear it in those words of, you're right and I was wrong. But you as the expert in the situation can know that, So anyways, I think it's interesting and it's important to remember not to rush people through the process of agreeing with you if you've challenged them and you're confident that you are right and they need to maybe see it your way. There's responsible ways to do it, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as you were sitting there talking, it kind of hit me that I never once sought out being anybody's go-to guy.
Huh.
Right? That wasn't an effort I made.
Okay.
It just happens. And I think that's the thing. If you're trying to make that happen, I don't know that you can, right? I think you end up it ends up happening, and you end up building that trust with people because you're genuine and because you're vulnerable and because you work hard for them and you seek knowledge and you earn their trust. But I don't know that you ever seek out, or you should ever really seek out. I think you just let it happen.
So what you're saying then is, it's almost like trying to squeeze onto a bar of soap, that the more you want, the harder it is to hold on to it, right? But what I hear in what you're saying, and as we slowly draw this thing to a close, I think it's an interesting parting thought. Speaking to the integrity aspect of all of this, right? So vulnerability, we've said that word a lot, talking about being able to say, I don't know, right? It involves a level of integrity to admit that, especially when you are face-to-face with a customer whose business or money you would like, that in a way it feels like you might be saying goodbye to the opportunity, right? And in reality, it may actually be the thing that earns you the opportunity. But what's difficult to know in that moment is, what is the specific thing you're going to say? What's the specific action you're going to do? Is it going to be the 7th time that I visit that contractor? Is it going to be the 4th, the 10th, the 11th? You don't quite know. And it speaks to having the right character, the right disciplines, the right actions, the right routines, those habits, whatever, to eventually earn you that business. And ultimately, if it's not meant to be, then you guys will not mesh and you'll go your separate ways, and that's that. But all of this is coming full circle for me right now.
Yeah, and I would say there's many times too that it didn't mesh at first, and they weren't great conversations, and you leave it with, well, hey, just use me as a second option if you ever can't get it right. And amazing how many times down the road an opportunity presents itself and they come back to you, and the fact that you did it that way and left their desire, their lack of interest in doing business with you, you left it at, hey man, if you ever need anything, let me know. Eventually they do need something, and they remember that you didn't push there, right? And I think that that also creates opportunity. There's no one set path and pattern in doing things, but I think integrity is part of, you said it right, you gotta have integrity, you gotta do what you say, and say what you do, and the little things matter, and if you do that, people will respect you whether they do business with you or not, and they will seek out opportunity with you.
Well, and I think it would be a mistake for anyone hearing this to think, okay, so what Aidan and Sean are saying is the sales tactic to win the business of a customer that says no to me is just to be like, that's cool, and then in a week they'll come back and I'll have their business. That's the wrong way to look at it, right? Because this goes back to what you were saying earlier, being willing to help customers solve problems that don't necessarily benefit you, right? And all of that, again, tying into integrity and genuinely wanting your customer to succeed, even if they are not your customer, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really cool aspect of what it means to be a go-to guy.
People know if you care, right? People can sense if you care. If you really care about not just them, even if you're just meeting them for the first time, but if you care about what you do and you care about what you represent or who you represent, they know that. They can feel that. And that's all that matters. That's really, in essence, the essence of trust is built on integrity, and it's built on respect. And I think there's no one path to always do it. You can take zigzag lines and U-turns and all of that, but at the end of the day, just be who you are and be honest, and I think people respect that.
Well, man, I was going to ask you to summarize one takeaway, but I don't know that you can say it any better than you just did. I think that's such a phenomenal piece of advice, that in all of these things, there is no one path to becoming the go-to guy, that it is balancing all of these awesome characteristics and wanting to, again, will the best for the people around you, right? So anyways, man, that's so cool. Sean, thank you so much for being here, man. This conversation was so cool. We turned into some really deep soul searching stuff, but I think that that's cool, and it to me it speaks to you as a person and what it means for you to be successful, and certainly it explains your success to me anyway. So anyways, man, thanks for being on the show. Hope we'll do this again sometime, dude.
Thanks for letting me be here. It was great. I had fun.
And that is our episode. Hope that you got a lot out of that. Really interesting conversations for sure. If you're not yet subscribed to the Contractor Elite podcast or newsletter, by all means, head to contractorelite.co right now. Get signed up, get on that mailing list. There's also an ability to make an account there if you want to access all of the previous content, the newsletters, the podcast episodes, and everything else that we've released. Until then, we'll catch you in the next one.